So Mike's going to talk to us about future policy directions and grower perceptions on rural water use and infrastructure programs. So I invite Mike to come up. Thanks, Mike.
Yep. Thanks, Lyndon. Just want to touch on a few major issues for us in terms of water, and it's interesting, of course, from our young achiever nominees that they all indicated that water was an absolute key issue, and that's also what we receive back from all our growers when we speak to them. I'll speak for a little while, and then we've just got Jason McCutcheon from the Never Tire Trangie scheme and James Duddy from up at Goondiwindi, and they're going to share their experience about some of the irrigation efficiency schemes that are available through the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. But obviously one of the key issues for agriculture and irrigated agriculture in Australia at the moment is the rollout of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, and most of you will be very familiar with the fact that it started back in effectively 2007 and has been rolling its way forward, and so we'll spend a little bit of time looking at that. In terms of water in general, it is a major issue for Cotton Australia, and we work very, very hard. It's probably the single area in policy that we put our most resources in, and we do that both directly and indirectly through another number of organisations. So we are members of the National Farmers Federation, both generally, but also in particular with the Water Task Force there. We're members and very active contributors into National Irrigators Council, New South Wales Irrigators Council, Queensland Farmers Federation. So we spend a lot of time not only dealing directly with the politicians and bureaucrats involved in water, but working with those organisations, always trying to get the best outcome. And I guess if we look at some of the things that have been achieved over the last few years, it's always slow, it's always difficult, but eventually we might get there. And I guess one example of that was the announcement last year of supplementary licences in New South Wales being issued in perpetuity. Supplementary licences were always an anomaly. They could have been cancelled effectively at any time without compensation, whereas general security licences and high security licences had a lot higher degree of protection. We started the process really, I suppose, in 2004 trying to get them recognised, and it really kicked into gear, I guess, in 2007 or 2006 in the lead up to the state election. But it didn't actually occur until 2014. So some of these things take a really long lead time, and you've just got to be patient, and we keep working on them. And floodplain harvesting licence is another case in point. Just looking at the progress of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, and this next slide's got a lot of detail on it, but at the back of the room when you go out, these next two slides are reproduced, so you might be able to look at them a little bit more closely at your leisure. But I guess one of the key sort of numbers is this one up here. So everyone would be familiar that the headline number about the Murray-Darling Basin Plan is to basically reduce the use of productive water by 2750 gigalitres. And as of the 30th of June, the government, one way or another, had contracted, either had it in the bank or absolutely contracted 950 GL. So they're just about 71% towards that target. On top of that, so we've still got, what have we got, sort of 800 GLs to go. There is an opportunity through what's called the environmental works and measures to effectively achieve another 650 GLs through environmental works and measures. Now, the reality is that the various states, and this is largely a southern basin focus program, the various states have put in their projects. Early indications, nothing official, but early indications is that they won't achieve 650, but they might achieve around about 400. So that could bring that 2750 down to 2350, narrowing that gap further. If we look in the northern basin area, we see the big areas where a lot of progress, if you call it progress, has to be made, is the Condamine-Ballon. In that catchment, the plan requires them to reduce their usage by 100 GLs. As of the 30th of June, they were at 54.1, still got 45.9 to go. If we look in the Queensland border rivers, 8 GLs, they've actually recovered 14. So not only do they have their in-catchment met, they've put 6 GLs to what's known as the shared northern component of 143 GLs. In New South Wales, Barwon, in fact all the northern basin valleys have all met their in-catchment requirements and have started to make a significant contribution to that 143. So if we look at the Barwon-Darling, they've actually contributed 19.8 to that 143, Guida 5.6, intersecting streams 8.1, and the Macquarie-Castlereagh 18.1. So what have we got? I can't even read it myself, but about 60 GLs has already been recovered out of that 143, 82 to go. And when you take into account the fact that the Condamine Ballon still has a significant gap to close, there's what have we got, about 130 GLs to go forward. I guess there's a couple of factors there, and I'll talk about one of them a little bit further down the track. But when we talk about 2750 GLs, that's of average long-term real water, if you like. So, you know, on average, they'll actually reduce the amount of use by 2750 GLs of actual water, which is, of course, different to entitlement. So to bring it all together and work out, you know, how much has been recovered in each valley, because obviously entitlement reliability varies, they've effectively come up with a conversion factor, you know, a little bit like trying to convert, you know, Aussie dollars into US dollars. But we believe in the Macquarie and in the Guida, they've actually got those conversion factors wrong. And we think if they rectify them, and we're slowly building a case and getting a little bit of traction, and when I say we, this is very much a joint effort between Cotton Australia and particularly the Guida Valley Irrigators Association, Macquarie River Food and Fibre, but also more generally what we call the Northern Valley Group, or the Northern Rivers Group, which is made up of the Macquarie, the Namoi, the Border Rivers and the Guida. We've been working very hard to get this anomaly rectified, and we believe there's actually something like 30 GLs of water that has been bought and paid for, but hasn't actually been accounted for because of the conversion factors. So if we're successful in that, that'll close that 60 GLs, that'll bring it up to around about 90 GLs. And so again, some room for some significant improvement. And as I say, from a government point of view, or a federal government point of view, you know, they've got a lot of motivation for recognising that water, because it is water that they've already bought and paid for, just the conversion factor hasn't recognised it. If we drop down into the Southern Valley and concentrate on New South Wales, where of course, you know, it's been a major growth area for us. Look, what have we done? We've got New South Wales Murrumbidgee in-catchment target was 320, New South Wales Murray 262. We can see that they've actually recovered 359 and 311 or 12. So again, they're in the stage where they're contributing towards their shared component and sort of closing that gap. The valley that you know, still needs some recovery to meet their internal requirement is the Lower Darling, that needs to recover 8 and has so far got 2.2. The other number on this screen that's worth reflecting on, and many of you might have heard recently that the government has committed to legislating that they'll purchase no more than 1,500 GLs, and that'll mean the pressure will be on for any further recovery to either occur through those works and measures or irrigation efficiency programs. And their progress towards 1,500 GLs so far is 1162, and I guess if we get that 400 or so of works and measures and a little bit more on on-farm and off-farm irrigation efficiency, they probably won't even get close to their 1,500. They might be able to pull up on their purchases at around about 1,300, 1,350. So I guess, you know, there's lots of things wrong about the basin plan and, you know, and concern and impact on our communities, but I just thought it's worth sharing you the amount of progress that has been made. And I guess it's also fair to say that we've probably seen, in terms of the impact of buybacks, the worst has already occurred in our communities. So if we get back, well, what else can we do in the area of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan? And I've touched on an important thing is us working with the federal government and the state governments, particularly New South Wales, but also Queensland, because it benefits Queensland, to get that conversion factor issue rectified. So there's 30 GLs there that needs to be rectified. For a long time, the Murray-Darling Basin Authority wanted to review all conversion factors for all valleys. And there's a bit of an argument that in some cases the conversion factors might be out by 1 or 2%, but it cuts both ways in those other valleys. But for the Guaita and the Macquarie, it's anything up to a 25 or 30% difference. And they even admit that when they calculated those conversion factors, they used a different methodology in those two valleys. And so we're slowly getting some traction and reasonably hopeful that we might be able to get that rectified. Another key issue, and for some people in the room, that, and if I reflect back on that slide on the Barwon-Darling, you can see that the Barwon-Darling had an in-catchment of 6, but they've actually had 25 recovered, already put 19.8, and if you sort of pro-rated their share of 143, that 19.8 should be 11 GLs. Many of our irrigators were very upset and annoyed at the government when about a month or so ago the Commonwealth announced a buyback tender in the Barwon-Darling to purchase more water. Now, we largely agree with very much the principle that if the government wants water, they should buy it, and they must buy it from willing sellers, and to that extent, tenders are a reasonable way to go. But when in that particular valley and catchment that they've already well and truly contributed more than what can be expected under the Basin Plan, we argued with government, and they never withdrew the tender, but I think they've got the message, and I suspect they're unlikely to put out another tender in the near future on the Barwon-Darling. That valley had certainly done its share of heavy lifting, as has a number of the other valleys. If we move up into Queensland, what are the opportunities that we have as far as the Basin Plan goes? Well, one is the Northern Basin Review. So when the plan was created, there was a recognition that there'd been a fair bit of science and a fair bit of knowledge, and probably none of it perfect, on the Murray section of the basin. But there really was not that much knowledge on the Northern Basin. So within the plan, there was an opportunity to review the sustainable diversion limits for the Northern Basin. And that review occurs towards the middle and end of 2016. But in the lead up to that, they're doing some more science work in the basin, northern part of the basin, also doing a lot of socio-economics. So there's always been a bit of an argument whether the authority has to give equal weighting to environmental, social and economic outcomes. But whether it's absolutely equal or not, they do have to take regard of the social and economic outcomes when they're making their final decision. So we've been working with the authority and trying to get as much early access as we can to the science review, and also helping with the economics. It's a little bit unclear how the final decision will be made. It'll be made by the authority board. It's not a black box program. It's not a matter of just punching numbers into a computer. But there is a possibility, and I don't want to overstate it, but a possibility that there'll be a change in the sustainable diversion limits in the north, and that should be a favourable one if it occurs. So naturally, it's something that we're spending a fair bit of effort in. There is the conversion factors that we spoke about. There is also a particular groundwater issue that's in Queensland. So the focus of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan has been very much on surface water, but it does also cover groundwater. And fortunately for most of the valleys and catchments, the authority accepted the sustainable diversion limits that have been put in place by water sharing plans and the like, so no real change. The only area where, in a way, there needed to be a change on the timing was on the Condamine alluvium around Cecil Plains and Dalby. And that focus there, the irrigators and the Queensland government had already agreed that they needed to reduce their take down to a sustainable yield in the order of 42, 43 GLs, and that was going to happen by 2019. And the Basin Plan came in, and there was now an opportunity to buy back that water between their current entitlement of around about 100 back to the 43. The government's run a number of tenders up there, but to date they haven't bought any water, and people are beginning to lose faith in that process. So we've been working very hard with the Commonwealth to say, look, when you run the next tender, you really have to meet the market. And to a degree, they had a relevant excuse early on that there hadn't been any actual free trades in the Condamine, but that's now occurred and there's a clear market price. So hopefully that'll result in some sales and allow a good structural adjustment of the groundwater changes there. Skipping off the basin plan into some other water areas that are of great interest to us. We've worked very closely with the irrigators and communities in Theodore, St George and Emerald on what's known as local management arrangements, which was effectively a move by the previous LNP government to privatise and transfer over the Sunwater Channel schemes, the 8 channel schemes in Queensland and those 3 cotton schemes to private management. Now that was looking really good up until the change of government earlier this year, and it effectively stalled. And while I'd have to say that it's probably not a high priority of the Palaszczuk government, indications that we are getting these days is that it's certainly not dead in the water, and we're hopeful that there'll be some positive news in that area in the not too distant future, but the timing is well and truly out of our control. We also, and it's related to water, but spent an awful lot of time and effort, particularly over the last 18 months in the area of energy. I guess with diesel pricing, our only point of influence is to make sure that the diesel fuel rebate is maintained, and people who follow the budget would see that every year that comes under attack. Particularly 2 years ago, it came under very sustained attack, and we were able to utilise, and we'll hear from Phil Elchin from Boyce a little bit later on, but we were able to utilise some data from the comparative study that was effectively able to neutralise a move that would have seen the diesel rebate disappear, or at least largely disappear for agriculture. And again, that issue came up not quite as hard this year, and we, through National Irrigators Council and NFF, had combined with the mining industry and put out a great booklet on the importance of the diesel fuel rebate. So that's a handy resource for the next time this issue comes up. Electricity pricing is something that just a matter of time in the way electricity prices are determined. We've put a lot of effort through what's called the Australian Energy Regulator over the last 2 years. And particularly in New South Wales, that's paid off, not only through our efforts, but the efforts of a lot of other organisations. We're able to see the network components of electricity prices reduce considerably, and we believe that for irrigators, it'll probably mean in this coming season, comparing usage for usage, something in the order of a 20% reduction in power bills. Unfortunately, the story in Queensland, even though it went through the same process, is not as healthy, but for the first year in many years, or the irrigation tariffs not increase, where for the last 3 or 4 years they've increased by 10% a year. And just to really put that into perspective, I think over the last 7 years, irrigation tariffs in Queensland had increased by 82%. And if you look at CPI over that same period of time, it was 22 or 23%, so massive differences there. Locally, in this part of the world, we had an embargo on access to supplementary water that ran from beginning of this year through until end of May. And that was effectively due to the fact that Broken Hill and Menindee Lakes was running low, Broken Hill was running low on their water supply. And while that's certainly a major issue, our irrigators in the border rivers and the Guida forego access to something like 60,000 megalitres of water, and plus some additional water along the Barwon Darling. So what we could say a direct on-farm cost in the order of $30 million. We've been able to successfully get the government to lift that embargo, and since that was lifted, there's been some limited access in the Guida and on the border rivers and the Barwon Darling, so that's positive. But we're now saying to government, look, there must be a way that we can actually recover some of that lost access over the last 12 months. And we're getting some positive vibes back from the Minister, Niall Blair, and his department. So it's something that we're continuing to work on. And looking forward a little bit, the Queensland Water Resource Plans and pricing, we'll have another round of those occurring in the not too distant future. We're going to hear from a minute, as I mentioned earlier, from Jason and James on irrigation efficiency programs. And if we think back to that slide on where we're up to with recovery of water and the focus of government to try and recover as much as they can through efficiency programs, I just ask irrigators to look at these programs simply from a business case. Effectively, people are being, if you like, engaging in programs, returning amount of water and being paid a multiple of the market value of that water. And these are the official figures off the federal website that are showing those market multiples of somewhere in the order of 2.4 and between 2 and 2.4 over the market price. Now that probably includes in those numbers a little bit of the administration costs, but certainly speaking to growers directly, I know growers have been getting anywhere between 1.6 and a multiple of 2, and some have possibly done better on those projects. Jason and James will talk about it a little bit more deeply, but I think if you've got genuine irrigation efficiency programs that you want to do, this is a great opportunity, and as we reflect back on that bigger slide, that opportunity may not be around for that much longer because that gap is closing fairly rapidly, particularly in New South Wales, particularly if those conversion factors are rectified and recognised. So, the programs are out there. Don't know what's happened there, but we've got the on-farm irrigation programs run here in the Northern Basin by, or Northern New South Wales through the Department of Primary Industries. We've got the Healthy Headwaters program that's operated in Queensland through the Department of Natural Resources and Mines. And in Southern New South Wales, they've just opened round 5 of their on-farm irrigation efficiency program that's actually directly run by federal government through local cooperators. So there's an opportunity there for people to take them up. But I might wrap up there unless anyone's got any particular questions on any of the work that Cotton Australia is doing in this area or other water-related questions.